So I'm just going to explain how this will work. I have 3 questions. I'm going to pose them to each of the panelists in turn. And like I said, please remember to tweet your questions at NUIG-CDLP using the hashtag DisabilityCultureQ&A. Okay, so my first question, and I'm going to be starting with Abby to answer this question. Article 30 of the UN Convention requires states to provide equal access for disabled people to culture, leisure, recreation, and sport. What do you think are the main barriers facing disabled people in these areas?
So thank you so much for having me on this panel. I am totally excited to hear what my co-panelists have to say. In regards to the main barriers that I see, my focus is on IP law primarily. That's sort of my background, and the barriers relating to access that come from the legal and policy fronts as they relate to cultural materials protected by IP. So for me, I think one of the main barriers for access for persons with disabilities is sort of twofold, but ultimately 2 sides of the same coin. That coin is a lack of imagination. So the lack of imagination on the part of policymakers, coupled with the lack of imagination on the part of the content industries. What I mean by a lack of imagination on the side of policymakers is a commitment to accomplishing accessible format cultural materials through a combination of exceptions and limitations and a patchwork of positive obligations placed on intermediaries primarily. This results in huge gaps, both in the media that is available accessibly and the communities of disabled people who are served by that media. A prime example of this would be the Exceptions and Limitations Treaty, known as the Marrakesh Treaty, which was designed to facilitate cross-border exchange and greater access to accessible format print material. That treaty is one that serves blind people, people with vision impairment, and people who are otherwise print disabled, which is not the full spectrum of people who could benefit from accessible format books. And the media that is sort of allowed to be made accessible is pretty severely limited, with audiovisual content being specifically excluded from that treaty. Now, it's a really wonderful thing, and it is something that was advocated for many, many years, and it has increased access, but it's limited even in the medium that is accessible. There are approximately 130 million books published in the world. Of that 130 million, about 415,000 of those books are available in accessible format. That is quite a minor percentage of the books that should be available. So we have on the policymaker side a sort of patchwork approach that leaves lots of gaps. And on the other side, we have the content industry, which they are very rarely innovators in the accessibility space. Now, we do see some content producers partnering with accessibility organizations, with accessible apps, etc. I'm going to talk about that more when we talk about question 2. But they don't have the imagination to picture what a born accessible business model would look like. We see accessibility added to art and culture as a secondary consideration. Primarily, we see that being addressed sort of in a retrofitting way rather than a built from the ground way. So I don't think that these things are done with the intention of exclusion. I think they are done because of a lack of imagination. So that lack of imagination, both on the policy and on the private actor side, results in barriers to accessibility. So thank you.
Thanks. I'm now going to ask the same question to Nidhi.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here, and thank you, Abby, for outlining some of the legal and policy frameworks and the barriers from that perspective. So one of the points, just to sort of also use another word, that people with disabilities are not seen economically empowered enough or not seen as consumers of content, if you would frame it that way, as a part of the social invisibility. And so after the legal and policy emphasis, I will emphasize a bit more on the barriers, more coming from the social space, which actually then influences policymakers, which influences implementers, which influences sort of society and interaction at large. Just to also start by saying that when we think about culture, when we think about leisure, when we think about sports, particularly in the developing countries and from a global south perspective, it really is not at the top of the hierarchy of needs. There is a very strong external hierarchy of needs that's designed socially for people with disabilities, which may or may not have been articulated on paper or in legal frameworks, but it is very much there. So, for example, access is considered in a very, very narrow way in terms of accessibility to maybe roads or at the most public transport. Um, Education is the next, and at the most employment. The language constantly around this hierarchy of need is at least you can receive this, because the model and the frameworks that we're working operating within are very much charity based still, with some shifts here and there or sporadic engagements with the social and post sort of human rights based models around disability. Um, Really thinking about culture, leisure, and sports without even a disability, again, in some of the context where it's not encouraged, these activities are not encouraged in terms of arts and sports, the equal emphasis, for example, in South Asia, there is not equal emphasis on arts and sports as much as it is on education and career and academics and sort of that space. It is still a career option, or it is still an activity which you engage with, not on equal footing with others. So disrespect in general in society around these activities compounds with the hierarchy of needs that are laid out for persons with disabilities. And so as a result, um, when the compounded effect is such that a Paralympics medal winner or a Asia level champion of a para badminton may not be equally respected as much as a badminton player because of the issue of worth of people with disabilities and what they bring to the society. A lot of the engagement with art, or partaking in artistic activities and leisure activities are are very much joined or associated strongly with this idea of incapability. So if you're blind, at the most you could sing because you're blind and you would not be capable to do anything else. If you're dyslexic, at the most you could paint or do some other artistic things. Really thinking through, culture and how do we build culture, and sort of intertwining it with sexual and reproductive health and rights and the social stigma. So when people with disabilities are considered asexual or stigmatized sexuality, or not desirable and not included in that way in the social fabric and engagement, it's also seen that almost amongst teenagers need specific cultural practices. So has become a culture in the metros. But would sort of people with disabilities be able to access these apps? So again, linking back to the WCAG guidelines and the content accessibility that Abby mentioned, um, uh, because not in many countries it's not equally emphasized in laws and policies. It's really treated, access to culture, to leisure, to sports is treated as a secondary thing. So giving an example from narratives from women with disabilities in India, from the I Can Lead Leadership national leadership program that we run, many of them said that they were included in schools and in education lessons, but they were not, their grounds weren't accessible. They were not included in sports. They were not included in even in the breakout sessions where they had to hide in the classroom because everything else was inaccessible. So what happens when within legal frameworks, this does not have a huge emphasis because of the social hierarchy and the social frameworks that I spoke about, the implementation and penalizing around this also gets compromised. I will pause there, and happy to outline more best practices and things that we could do in the next round.
Great, thank you, Nidhi. And now over to you, Sinead, with the same question.
I think initially I didn't want to go first, and now I'm deeply regretting going last. That was incredibly interesting. Thank you so much. I know we're just about to kind of change over with interpreters, so we'll give them a second. Thank you. I think it's so interesting what has already been raised here within this conversation. For me, when I think about culture, often a synonym that comes to mind is institution, and another one is system. I often struggle with the duality of, do we change the culture? Do we change the legislation? Do we try to insert new thinking into societal minds? Or do we need to change the whole framework? And often it's all of those things all at once. When I think about access and participation to culture and who gets to make the decisions by which that participation and access is granted, I often ask questions such as, who's in the room? Here in Ireland, which is where I'm based, we're just about to explore a new vision for government. We're about to develop new roles, and one of them is a Minister for Disabilities. And I think we need to, as a society, ask ourselves the question, how often can we talk about disability and not have disabled people speaking or be the voices, whether that's a voice that's interpreted, or whether that's a voice that's spoken, that is central to those issues. And for me, I think when we talk about culture, when we talk about this article, it is really explicit that we make sure that we use the mandate of nothing about us without us. For me, I'm really interested in the intersection of design and disability. So when we talk about access and participation to culture, a question that I often ask is, well, who can access those spaces? So often culture is housed within listed, historic and protected buildings because they are architecturally significant. They matter to the history of the city and they matter to people. But which kinds of people? Why is it still appropriate in 2020 that many of the world's finest cultural institutions exist in buildings where it is legally sound to exclude disabled people because they cannot be made accessible? When do we stop putting architecture and laws protecting that architecture before disabled people? Because if disabled people can't even enter museum spaces or galleries, how could they imagine or envision working there? How could they be a curator and cultivate an exhibition that is about and by our stories, which have been missing from these cultural institutions forever? How could they be the director of these spaces? Because if you cannot see it, you cannot be it. So we are so far behind in our cognizance of participation that we are still thinking about an access route out the back and who can be involved. And I think perhaps this opportunity that we are currently sitting within at the moment is a way in which to reconfigure that thinking. How do we not just see this as something that we have to legally do, but actually what's the opportunity to look at accessibility, architecture, and innovation and design all together? How could we make a beautiful listed building accessible, and accessible that doesn't detract from the architecture, but almost improves it? Why does a ramp look like something that maybe isn't so aesthetically pleasing? Because it wasn't designed by people who used it. So in terms of participation, it's not just talking about giving access to culture, but it again impinges on design and dignity. And by increasing access in a very physical way through legislation and through construction, we can then provide opportunities to transform company cultures internally so that disabled people can be employed in multifaceted ways. I think this conversation is so timely. I think it's really important that we are talking about culture, and perhaps, as the other speaker said, many people are watching or saw this come upon their Twitter timeline and thought, really, is this the time to be talking about culture? But as an Irish person, we have had 2 recent referendums, and those referendums were not just decided by political will, but were decided by shaping hearts and minds. Conversations that happened around dining room tables, around human rights to individuals who were once considered maybe not minorities, but vulnerable voices. And I think now is an opportunity in which we can do that. Looking at a global context, we're seeing the Black Lives Matter movement, so important, being so vocal, but also realizing that according to the Rudderman family study, 50% of Black people who are killed by police have some form of disability. So again, going back to who's telling our stories, who gets to narrate our experiences within political systems, within cultural institutions, and unless we can be in those rooms, our participation isn't all that we need to fight for. It's our agency and our existence, but participation is a really good place to start.
Great, thank you. And you make a really important point, and it's something that we really considered when organizing this event. Is it appropriate to talk about culture now? And I think if we understand culture broadly to mean not just what we think of as fine arts, for example, culture should be part of the fabric of our everyday lives. And disabled people have their own unique cultures that they participate in and are part of and belong to, but also want to participate in the culture that exists within other identities and the broader society. So we think that even if when the world's on fire, we should be talking about culture and access. So thank you for that. I'm going to stay with Sinead now for the next question. So now that we've talked a little bit about the barriers, I want to talk about some examples of real access. So what examples of real access to these domains that we've been speaking about, culture, art, leisure, recreation, sport, have you seen or experienced and that you find most exciting? And do you think any of these can be replicated in other places or other contexts?
One of my favorite cultural institutions to visit is one that you may not often immediately think of. It's the Guggenheim Museum and Gallery in New York. And if you have been there, the Guggenheim is built on a spiral ramp. And you must go from the bottom all the way to the top and then back down. There are other accessible designs and facilities available. But what's really interesting is that everybody experiences it within the same way. That what is considered beautiful is also considered accessible, and it occurred at the very inception of the museum. So access wasn't something that was an afterthought or all of a sudden figured out that there was a legal requirement by which to do it. And for me, that is a really wonderful way of thinking about accessibility as something that is just form and just function. An experience personally that I have had within culture that was very helpful and very important in terms of participation was with the National Museums of Scotland. The National Museums of Scotland last year held an exhibition called Body Beautiful. It was the first museum to hold an exhibition on diversity in fashion, which maybe you wouldn't think that would happen in Scotland first, but it did. They approached me and asked if they could borrow some of my clothes to put on display, specifically about the section within the exhibition on disability. I said, sure. And as we began to evolve the process, I asked, how will these clothes be on display? And they were very transparent and honest and said that they would hang them from the ceiling. I said, great. How is everything else being displayed? And they said, oh, well, mannequins, because, they exist. They don't exist for bodies like yours. I said, okay. So how do we change that? And that's a dangerous question to ask because the answer that you get may not be the one that you want. But what it did mean was that I then went to London and over 4 different sessions had my body physically cast. And a mannequin was created that's now available for retailers and for cultural institutions to be able to acquire, to be able to display things effectively. Going back to the point of not just who tells our stories, but who gets to narrate them, particularly in public places. How often do you get to see bodies that look like yours if your disability is visible, or experiences that narrate yours if your disability is invisible? And so often, as was said earlier, the ignorance is not malicious. We have just been born into an ableist society because it is unimaginable that we could have been born into any other one. We have come through a medical, social, human rights model of disability so quickly, and yet still so much of the access that we require to participate is lagging behind. But I think what cultural institutions can do, and an example in Scotland in terms of a positive one, is acknowledging that exclusion and to collaborating with those with a lived experience of disability, because they are the experts within their own experience and within their own bodies. And from that, something much more powerful with agency and dignity can be created. And I think often when we think about access policies, be it physical, I think, what legislators can do is they can change the legislation around historic and protected buildings and bring in disabled people. But I think there are lots of solutions that can be found within authentic collaboration. And I wish that there were more examples, but I have hope that it'll continue to grow.
Question to Nidhi. So Nidhi, if you can hear us, we're asking you the same question about any examples of real access that you've experienced that you find exciting and that you think are replicable in other contexts.
Right. Thank you so much. I think Sinead presented very important points around agency and participation. Nothing about us without us has been the mantra of the movement. Anyway, so thinking through that and weaving it in all our sort of not just social but policy and other frameworks is also extremely important. For me, culture currently and in the current crisis, right? I don't know how we could not speak about culture when there is globally we're seeing such a huge shift in culture. When we say we're going from physical to digital, as if these two spaces were divided. But we also see the merging of these spaces even more, and we're speaking about a virtual culture that's emerging, right? We were always in virtual spaces. We occupied digital spaces. We engaged with them, etc., etc. We used it for connection. But I think the world right now, which is transformed or is transforming rapidly, is in this digital culture space. And so, what does this digital culture mean? And often, what happens is because we speak about retrofitting in a lot of spaces. And again, we're still in the space of thinking about infrastructure and built environment and public transport. Often in developing countries, we forget about digital space being a space. And it's very interesting because I was reading Harbin's book, Harbin Jerma, who's a deafblind lawyer from Harvard and works on digital access from the States, and they were fighting a case around if digital space was a space in of itself, and really recognizing that around culture has been something that's been very interesting. And I thought, this digital space, and I'd like to specifically share some websites and some kind of examples here on how in the current digital culture things have become easier because of certain models that exist. Online gaming sites, something that everybody who's non-disabled would take for granted. To think about what access means in this space, because recreation in this current time of frustration, isolation, or rather heightened frustration, heightened isolation, heightened helplessness is extremely important. There is a website called QC Salon, a gaming platform called QC Salon, specifically designed for blind users. And I thought that was extremely interesting. The way communities are built and the way isolation is being cut through this kind of online gaming practice as a part of leisure and access to some kind of sport, etc. So I think that would be one of my current favorites on how it also weaves into continuing social friendships, cutting down isolation, building community, better engagement with family and friends, because if you think about blind people, they're not going to be getting onto a video call and feeling connected. So what are these forms of connections that this kind of accessible leisure helps us form? There are also sort of smaller initiatives. One of them was Velapanti that we took up in the month of April as a series of online house parties that we organized. And something why I wanted to flag this was at that point, we used a platform which was then being proclaimed as absolutely unsecure, which would have been unsecure. And we got a lot of trolling messages, not just from feminists, but from civil society, from others who were not related. They were like, you're not using the right platform. And then we had to turn around and say, but that's the most accessible one. So really walking this fine thread between security and access was something that we did through smaller online house party initiatives of engagement, etc. I wanted to outline 2, 3 more things quickly. There are smaller initiatives which civil society has taken up. So nonprofits, disabled people's organizations. So one of them is an initiative by an activist in Colombo who's trying to make parks accessible within Colombo. And that I thought was just as a step for the city to think about access was extremely important. And I often joke and say, you know, I'm obese because I never had access to a park independently. I had to go for a morning walk with somebody. I had to ensure that I was with somebody. That's also partly an excuse, but that's how things go. And to then highlight one of the initiatives that we run, which was outlined briefly by you, called My Tale Too. And here I'd like to circle back to something that Sinead said around scripts and who are like us. And this initiative is particularly to reclaim popular narratives. So women with disabilities as producers of art, being trained as producers of art, to reclaim fairy tales, which are popular narratives, and to weave it with their life stories and realities. To become, you know, it would be coming up as a published project within a year. We're still in the phases of writing the story, but really thinking about, and this stemmed from an idea where a child with a disability, where a girl child with a disability turned around and told her mother around fairy tale reading that I would never have a Prince Charming because none of these women are like me. So really, you know, smaller initiatives and two sort of larger initiatives, one private sector and one other that I'd like to highlight here is Bookshare. And probably Abby, you know, it's linked to the Marrakesh Treaty, to intellectual property, to copyright, etc. But Bookshare is an online library for the print disabled. It's not just for blind individuals, which it is for everyone who's print disabled. And the last that and really access to this kind of knowledge. And I can tell you that before Bookshare entered my life many years ago, I did not have access to this kind of reading, in spite of being amongst the privileged people within the country. And the last that I'd like to say is everyone talks about, oh, let's connect over Netflix. And really, if you had to compare it with other platforms, just I would like to put it here. I don't want to say all content there is accessible, but it has really set a standard or a comparable standard or an example for other platforms that could take entertainment access for deaf communities, for hard of hearing community, for those with attention deficit disorder, for blind, etc., with their accessible features to a next level. Pausing here to just move to Abby. Thank you.
Then I'll hand over to Abby for the next question, for the same question. So examples of real access that are exciting and can be replicated.
So firstly, Bookshare is amazing. I was very, very fortunate to be seconded there a few years ago. The work they do is fabulous. I can't praise it enough. And it's actually really great that Nidhi brought up the Netflix situation, because I want to talk about film. That Netflix settlement was huge, and Netflix has made huge strides in making sure that there are audio descriptions, captions, and other accessibility tools already there in their program. It's great. When I think about Article 30, my focus is generally on how we make copyright protected works accessible. And film is one of the more frustrating ones. If things are shown on television, some places place positive duties on broadcasters to make sure that they are broadcast with accessibility tools built in. Other places, like Brazil, require that all films released have sign language interpretation. Other states don't do anything at all. So I want to tell you about an app that I came across a couple of years ago called ActiveView. Now, I find the ActiveView app, well, it's no longer known as ActiveView, it's now Spectrum Access Enabled Media. I find this app incredibly exciting. ActiveView is an app that creates a second screen experience that will automatically sync up to media you are watching, assuming that that media has been made available through the ActiveView app. and will do a wide variety, a wide variety of things. It can provide subtitling, it can provide dubbing, it can provide captioning, it can provide audio description, and as of 2019, some films have even been made available with American Sign Language as a second screen experience. So ActiveView has partnered with studios over the past several years to release these accessible format tools with their films, either in the studio release at the theater or for streaming later in your own home. And they provide synchronous accessibility tools, which is great. So when we have studios partnering with accessibility apps, we get things that are built to be accessible. In 2019, as I mentioned, ActiveView partnered with Lionsgate Film to introduce their very first synchronous sign language interpretation film, which was the movie Dreamer? I think Wonder, which had already been in the cinema and then gone to home video, but they connected with America's Top Model winner and deaf activist, and I forgot to write his name down, to be their sign language interpreter. And this film, when released, was accessible to American Sign Language speakers. They've worked with other studios over the years to make these things available with a broad variety of tools. They were recently acquired by a cable company, a major cable company in the United States, Charter Spectrum Communications. And that has increased the number of films that they have in their library that are accessible in a wide variety of ways for users, from a relatively small number to hundreds, which is something that the AFB in the United States has been very excited about. So this is an example of private industry partnering with accessibility organizations and creating something that is born accessible instead of retrofitting. Added to this, we see more movement in the film industry. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences is creating a new set of representation and inclusion standards that every single film that wants to be considered for an Oscar has to implement, which is another huge, huge move. So I would really like to see this sort of innovation that's happening in cinema happen more broadly, more things being born accessible. So like a broad rollout of what this Spectrum access enabled media app is doing. Every single film could be released that way. The name of the app is Spectrum Access Enabled Media. And for anyone who wants to check it out, I downloaded it living here in Germany. You don't have to be a Charter cable subscriber to use it. The library of what is available is not as large as we would like, but it is growing. So this, for me, is a really great example of moving away from creating accessible format works as an exception with a charity model in mind, and moving towards putting the onus on the content producers, the people who are making the content available to the public for sale, to make the work accessible. So that is my sort of exciting movement towards accessibility.
That's great. Thank you, Abby. I'll stay with you now for the next and final question from me before we enter the audience Q&A portion of the webinar. So the final question from me is about COVID-19, because this pandemic and the resulting lockdowns have really reminded so many of us of the importance of art and culture and sport in our lives, for entertainment, for pleasure, and for our own mental health. So what lessons would you like us to learn from this time in making these arenas more accessible for disabled people in the future?
So this is a really hard question for me, because I feel like there are many, many, many lessons that we can take from this time to increase accessibility across a broad variety of cultural, recreation, sporting activities. But I think that the most important lesson to take from this experience of being locked down is that we have an absolutely wonderful opportunity to raise awareness. Because for many people, myself included, while I care deeply about access to culture, access to recreation, leisure, sport, and intellectually, I can tell you that lack of access to these things is a violation of human rights. My experiences of having these things denied to me has been a largely temporary inconvenience. Until this period of being locked down and unable to go places I want to go, to access media that I want to access, to play the sports that I want to play, my experience of inaccessible cultural material has been intellectual. It has brought home in deeply personal ways what life is like when you can't do these things because they are not available to you. I think that we are facing a time when we can say to people, think about what your life is like when you can't go to the football match with your friends. Think about what life is like when there's nothing that you can watch on Netflix. You've reached the end of the material that is available to you. And to use this moment as a time to build awareness of the importance of culture to us as human beings in our connections with each other and in building our personhood. So the lesson to take is one of, let's raise awareness. Let's push harder now, because as we are reopening, we do have an opportunity to reimagine. We have an opportunity to put pressure, because everything is in flux and everything is changing. So when we reopen, whenever that is, we shouldn't be going back to business as usual. We've had this experience of a digital interaction, distance education, distance consumption, meeting up with friends through alternative media to access works in different ways. And we should remember that. And I do want to say this with the caveat that not everyone in the world has access to this digital sphere. And that capacity is incredibly important. But we should be considering about what policies that we can push for that will create that digital sphere in a growing and inclusive way. So what tech solutions really worked for our disabled community members, and what tech solutions were exclusive? How can we foster and grow that? Well, the way we can do that is through people talking and people raising awareness of what worked, what didn't. And so for me, the biggest lesson is to take this time of everything being in flux and push lean in. So that would be my, what do we take from this? How do we go forward?
Great, thank you. And the same question to Nidhi now.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I will reiterate some of the things that Abby said, because I think while we're creating this new normal, I find it extremely odd when people say we are in a new normal. And I want to say we are not in a new normal. We have this opportunity to create a new normal. I think it's a great time for us to pause. And as I've said in one of my previous sort of responses, for us to assess where are we ending up mimicking inaccessibilities from the physical space into the digital space. Where are we saying it's okay if the platform is partly accessible? Let's invite this person for a webinar. It's equal to saying they're a wheelchair user, there are 5 steps, if they can, it's okay. Otherwise, we lift them and pick them up. It's not dignified. We need to, and I think all three of us have said it in different ways, to think about dignity, agency, inclusion, autonomy, even within, or human rights, even within the digital spaces, which didn't have such a huge thrust before. I'd like to say that sporadic efforts are not okay. So many platforms or many organizations, people, governments right now in their engagement are sort of having either sporadic or tokenistic efforts around including disabilities. So having one session with sign language and saying, oh, we also do sign language interpreted webinars, which is absolutely not something that should be acceptable. And I agree, this is a time for us to push harder, to have this whole awareness, but also very strong advocacy initiatives with public and private sectors, to re-envision people with disabilities, to visibilize people with disabilities, to really think through citizenship, to really think through consumption, to really think through not just rights framework, but user framework, etc. I want to outline, and I want to, again, it may seem a little repetitive, but I do want to say in countries, and particularly in the South Asian region, where inaccessibilities is so much more, who brings accessibility? It's the people. So in India, if you walk on the street and you don't have, the footpath isn't right, you just ask someone to assist you, or ask someone to assist you across the street. And they bring accessibility to people with disabilities' lives. There's a huge element of interdependence. What this current virtual world does, it is sort of provides you the assistance, but isolates you in many more ways. So you cannot sit, watch a movie, and somebody cannot fill the silences for you. And so the need for accessibility comes up even more strongly in culture, in leisure. I want to come back to art. When we talk about art, I want to emphasize definitely around leisure, because one of the things to balance mental health, to sort of not move into many of the mental health conditions, into depression, into feeling isolated, into escalated fear, etc., is having access to other leisure activities, to this break that people say. I think that also extends to, and when we say advocacy, it's not like, okay, now today let's start talking to only the entertainment platforms, the online libraries, and the gaming platforms. It also means having virtual office spaces accessible, because what you're leaving out the person from, or excluding them from, when virtual office platforms are inaccessible, is not really the work, because the work gets done through email and other sources and alternate ways that teams work on. What really people get excluded from is the leisure conversation, is the art, is the go-to thing, is the cultural practices and conversations and opportunities that stay in there. Two very concrete things in the current times, because COVID is here since a while and seems like it's staying for a while. Making art intentionally more inclusive through intentional outreach. So when it's always leaving no one behind, it's for all, it's not enough to include people with disabilities. And we've seen that in many of our experiences. through human rights treaties, through other policies, global conversations, etc. But to really have this intentional outreach to artists, to include them in this whole sort of altered system of art, right? So when we're talking about virtual art spaces, and because I'm India's first female disabled comedian, I just like to give an example of stand-up comedy, and there are many online shows going on. But actually, in this online space, being a blind comedian, for me, it really helps because it would mean that the distance between, when you're on the stage and the person is, the crowd is in front of you, it's a visual connect. But here, you have a close audio feedback. So really intentional inclusion of artists with disabilities, bringing more funding to the art and disability inclusion space, definitely inclusion in programming. So again, there are many film festivals and many art festivals that are running online. So having an intentional inclusion in programming, but also in designing. So going back to Sinead's point of nothing about us, without us, and as an example, representation. So in film screenings and film festivals or art festivals, really seeing if there is a component of nothing about us without us in the designing, but also in the representation. If you're doing book readings, are the protagonists living with disabilities somewhere? Are disabled authors reading the books? If there's art exhibits online, are they also by disabled artists? Is there art that represents disability and diversity in its way? So some overall steps which are long term on encouraging advocacy and awareness, but also some micro concrete steps that could be built around inclusion and access around culture, art, and leisure. Thank you.
Thank you, Nidhi. And now finally to you, Sinead, with that same question.
Thank you so much. To reiterate and to underline Nidhi's final point there, our inclusion must be explicit, because for so long, our exclusion has been explicit. I think it's also really important to point out that our inclusion must also be intersectional, that when we are talking about disability, we are not just talking about it from a lens like mine, which is white, straight, cisgendered, grew up working class, but moved to middle class. And I think making sure that we are, particularly in this moment, thinking across disability through various other identities has never been more important. I think if I could approach this through different tiers, I think what's really important in terms of moving from this moment and creating a movement is listening to disabled people. In terms of the learnings that we have experienced, so much of the learnings that we, and perhaps you as a majority, have discovered in this moment are actions that the disabled community have been calling for such a long time. So, for example, the unemployment in the disabled community. Many disabled people requested perhaps either an interview or, when in employment, that work could be done from home in a space that was more accessible. Now, that is not a rationale for not making workspaces accessible, but in the interim, it is a solution that creates employment and innovation. However, the working world said that it just wasn't possible. And until it was necessary for the majority, there was no appetite by which to make that innovation possible. We've now learned that it is. We have now learned that many of us can do our jobs to a similar capacity at home. So what are the other areas and ways in which disabled people are calling for accessibility and are articulating their advocacy? And how can we learn? Because I think what's really central to this entire movement is realizing that every issue is a disability rights issue. And if we focused on that lens, we would find solutions that would benefit everybody. Because again, when we're talking about disability, we're not just talking about people like me, who is a little person, but anybody who for a short amount of time becomes disabled, or in preparation for an increasing aging society and world. I think what also needs to happen is that disabled people can no longer be the only advocates. Allyship is a rhetoric that has never been more proliferated in wider society than it has been in recent weeks. And asking individuals how you can be an ally to the disabled community. So, as was already mentioned, ensuring that online and digital communications are accessible is the very beginning If you are part of a larger company or organization and you have been using digital tools like this one, has there been a request for a sign language interpreter? Has there been a request for closed captioning? Have you been explicit in your inclusion of disabled voices within that dialogue, even if it doesn't seem like disability is the central issue? Because we are not just providing access for the speakers who are participating in this panel, but for anybody who may be listening or participating in a different way and who may want to come on to the next webinar. Because again, if inclusion is not explicit, how does anybody who is deaf or hard of hearing know that a webinar like this is something that they can participate in? I think when we talk about access to culture and access to institutions, we quite rightly focus on physical access in terms of buildings, legislation, and how those things can be changed. But again, talking through and thinking through an intersectional lens, making sure that actually we're talking about access in its broadest possible forms, both in terms of monetary access, in terms of class. And I think when we talk about artists and culture, we need to also think about what are the opportunities within the world, either through corporate sponsorship or through collaboration, where we can make sure that actually the people who are attending our design schools, our art schools, have access to those opportunities that is not limited based on being able to afford the funds or that the immediate entry assessment is inaccessible. How can we provide opportunities that are accessible and inclusive so that actually we're not just, again, speaking to the same group of disabled artists, but that there is a continuous wave of talent being able to succeed and find space for their voice and their artistic work. I think the last piece that I would say in terms of work that you as an individual can do, and it goes back to digital communications, that if you are using social media platforms, how explicit are you in your inclusion? If you are using Instagram stories, are you captioning your videos? If you're posting to your main feed, are you using the alt text function so that screen readers can read that text visibly? And the same with Twitter. And when we talk again about who's not in the room, Twitter released a new feature this week, which was the ability to send audio voice notes. Great. But there was no capacity by which you could also include a transcription. And it makes it very clear that there was just nobody disabled or an advocate or an ally in that space helping to shape and form that policy. The very final point I would make is that if you were disabled, consider using your voice to ensure that powerful decisions can be made. So whether that is running for local election, whether that is making sure that your accessibility needs are not something that you feel uncomfortable with, but something that you are legally entitled to because you have a human right to them, that find your community of other advocates that will support you, because access is not just about individuals, but a society as a whole, and it is all of our responsibility to ensure that the spaces we create, be it physical or digital, are accessible and inclusive to everyone.
Thank you, Sinead, and thanks to all of our panelists. We've started to get some questions coming in, so please continue to tweet your questions for the panelists at NUIG-CDLP using the hashtag disability culture Q&A, sorry, to be accurate. So the first question I have here in our question and answer section of the webinar is not directed at any particular panelist, so you can let me know which of you would like to answer it. But it's a question coming in from Japan, and the questioner has asked that some disability activists in Japan do not like sports and leisure because they're related to competitions, discrimination, and economic gaps. Is there the same situation in other countries? And I'm guessing they're wondering, what can we do about the exclusion from people of disabled people from these opportunities? So who would like to take that question first?
I'm not sure I understand the question exactly, so I'm going to answer it as I understand it. And please feel free, person who questioned, to correct me if I'm wrong. I don't inherently think that competition is in itself a bad thing. It's a thing that many people find self-worth with. But the ability to access those competitions, the discrimination in access to sport, and the economic reality of many sports cost money to participate in, that is, I think, fairly universal. And I think that one of the things that we have to, from a policy point, really engage in is thinking about how we fund sports and how we allocate funding for training of coaches, for subsidizing participation for people who are economically disadvantaged. And on top of that, we need to mainstream disabled sports. I think that it's insane that we have both a Paralympics and an Olympics. They should be one event, and the accomplishments of para-athletes should be on the same level as the accomplishments of other Olympic athletes. Instead of doing it afterwards and not having the same sort of media coverage and hoopla around the Olympics as is missing in the Paralympics. So I think that there's sort of a policy and also a mainstreaming need here of greater education and funding coming from the government and greater mainstreaming of the inclusion of disabled persons in sport. So I guess, I hope I have answered in some way.
Okay, and while we swap the interpreters, I'll just check if any of the other panelists wanted to add to Abby's response to that question. Sinead?
I was just going to add one point there, that in terms of looking at not enjoying leisure activities because they are related to discrimination, I think that's absolutely true, not just to Japan, but to so many experiences of disabled people globally. It comes back to the point that many of the panelists made about exclusion previously being explicit. If we take, for example, theatre spaces, so often theatres are in protected buildings and they cannot be made accessible in the myriad of ways which are needed for disabled patrons. So often that means that if you were a wheelchair user, you may be down the very back in terms of the accessible space for you because there are stairs or there is no way in which to get you closer to the stage. So your experience is completely compromised. Your relationship to culture has been entirely discriminated against. And when we talk about what this moment could mean, maybe now when so many of the theatres in London's West End have been, notified that they won't be opening for the remainder of the year, maybe now is an opportunity to think through creatively accessibility options that wouldn't have been possible before because there would have been patrons in the theatre every night. So actually, how can we utilize this moment to create access in physical and digital ways for the disabled community as a whole when all of these spaces are closed for business as usual?
That's a great point. Thank you, Sinead. Nidhi, did you have anything to add on that question?
Abby and Sinead have covered everything. I just want to iterate Abby's point because that was something I brought up in my first response around Paralympics and champions there are not treated equally or at par. So it comes back to, not just discrimination, but this whole thing about dignity and equality. And I feel that's really at the heart of it, along with economic opportunities, funding opportunities, and just opportunities in general because of the hierarchy of needs.
Thank you. While we wait for more questions, I might take the opportunity to ask something that's been discussed hotly on the tweet chat in general since we opened it up yesterday evening, where we were talking about representations of disability in popular culture and what people's favorite examples of those are. I wonder, do any of the panelists have any disabled cultural icons that they want to share with us or talk about?
Yes. Sorry, can I go?
Yes.
I wanted to say because I want to come from a space of being a comedian. I'm not just saying popular culture is cinema, is other things. For me, Nesun Zayed, the disabled comedian from New Jersey, as she calls it, being from New Jersey is another disability, as she says. So I think for me, she brings a whole refreshing perspective to popular consumption of comedy per se. But I also, so one of the icons there within the comedy space. But I also want to say, we'll find very few examples of within mainstream cinemas, within writers. Sarah Bernard will be the second, the author that I would really I'm really fond of, because she brings disability in such an easy way with all its nuances into teenage romance. And I feel that's such a space to influence. And teenage is a space where a time and place in life where you're sort of thinking, reflecting, challenging everything, getting influence, building ideas of romance, about relationships, about your negotiations with the world. And I see so effortlessly that Sarah brings through her books, disabled friendships, disabled relationships. So for me, those two persons are really important people within this space, influencing representation in popular culture. But I do want to say that just not being thoughtful around representation in popular culture has resulted in further human rights violations. We feel like, oh, it's cinema, oh, it's books, it's stories, it's okay, they are anyway fiction, they're made up, but it has a huge sort of implication on human rights violation. It has a huge implication on setting sort of on influencing mindsets and social engagements. And just two brief examples around Me Before You, the book and then the film around euthanasia. And so the decision of the lead protagonist, who is quadriplegic, to rather die than be in a non-normative, in a disabled relationship with an able-bodied woman. And the second is an Indian film which sort of totally valorizes within relationships the non-disabled partner and sort of diminishes the identity of the woman with the disability. I feel like such representations are really problematic, are definitely done without including any disabled people. So we keep circling back to nothing about us without us, and very few names to share as happy names or happy moments who we could follow, who bring happy moments of inclusion who we could follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Nidhi. Does anyone else have some disabled cultural icons they'd like to share? Sinead?
Yes, please. I think two, Julia Mercado, who is a physically disabled model who uses a wheelchair, has most recently been cast in The L Word. And it is a really wonderful, nuanced role where her disability isn't hidden, but it's also not the main plot point of her entire character. I think, to reiterate what has already been said, is, we have really been challenged by the lack of visible role models, but when disability has existed within mainstream culture, often has been written from a non-disabled perspective. And I think as we look forward to what different industries can do, one of the steps in which Hollywood can take and the various different agencies can lead out and step forward is that, if you are not disabled, should you be taking a role in which the protagonist or the character that you're portraying is? And I think there's two schools of thought: that the role of an actor is to be able to transform into any sort of character, and they should be able to, if they are talented enough, play disabled. But what does that mean? What are we actually saying with that sentence? And I think whilst that may appear fair and that may appear to be a logical definition of the skill of an actor, but if disabled people do not even get to play disabled roles, where are our bodies and experiences permitted to exist within those cultural spaces? So I think it goes back to not just accepting visibility as the primary criteria for success. But we need to be ensuring that within the academy, that there is a designation of people who are writing, who are directing, who are producing, who are financing all of these projects. Because until the lens is accessible and inclusive, these flaws in representation are only going to continue. So I would say Gillian Mercado, if you haven't seen The L Word, and if you have not yet watched Crip Camp on Netflix, which is an incredible documentary of Camp Jeddah, and it is kind of co-narrated by Jim LeBrecht and the extraordinary Judy Heumann, you need to go and watch that documentary, because it is the definition of nothing about us without us, and how young people who were told the importance of their voice and the value of their contributions, how they changed the law and the world, and the importance of recording those stories. They were teenagers at camp, and yet somebody had the idea to record all of that footage. And now we have the evidence to inspire generations of disabled people to use their voices.
Thanks, Sinead. Yeah, I think absolutely I would echo the recommendation of watching Crip Camp. And I think it's really important that it's on a platform like Netflix and available to people all over the world. Abby, I just want to throw it to you as well for any ideas you have.
I think that one of the things that we as mass media really struggles with is portrayal of neurodiverse characters. The sort of way that they are portrayed, because their disability is generally somewhat invisible, has been really problematic. And you can name endless shows that have a character who's neurodiverse and portraying essentially the Wikipedia definition of what neurodiversity looks like. So I wanted to highlight two characters that I think are just really wonderful portrayals of neurodiverse persons. The first is a Muppet, and it's Julia from Sesame Street. Her neurodiversity is not the focus of her character. It was simply introduced as just part of her. And I think that that's really great. And then the other is Abed from the show Community, which is a hilarious show. And Abed's neurodiversity is sort of part of what he is valued for in his community. So I think that both of those portrayals of people with neurodiversity are really positive, and I think they're great. So.
Thank you for that. We're getting a few more comments and questions coming in. So we have two comments that I just want to share with the speakers, and then one question. So one comment comes from Moira Jenkins, who says that we shouldn't work on projects unless disabled participant artists are also paid because of nothing about us without us. And that Article 30, subsection 2 asks for more than participation. It demands recognition of and support for authorship. Another comment that we have from No Ropes Theatre Company is about cultural icon, and it says that Switched at Birth was a great platform for deaf actors. I don't know if anyone's seen that TV show. So those are the comments. And we have one question from Eleanor McSherry, which is, do you feel that due to the nature of intellectual disability, people with these types of disabilities get left out of the discourse around culture, sports, etc.? So do any of our panelists want to answer that specific question around intellectual disability? Abby?
So I think that this is an absolute truism, particularly when it comes to access to works protected by copyright. One of the things that is somewhat difficult is that copyright law and the exceptions that allow for the making of accessible format works sort of limits what you can do to make a work accessible, and altering the fundamental nature of whatever it is to make it a simple version is one of those legal gray areas that a lot of people are not willing to venture into. And so we end up in an area of great legal uncertainty. And so the traditional way we approach making cultural work accessible through exceptions to limitations, nonprofits and charities and governments taking a work and adapting it, it becomes a legally fraught thing to do, which is hugely problematic and difficult. And I don't have a good answer for this. I think that it comes down to we have to look at how we do accessibility on a different way. We can't just go for this exceptions and patchwork because it leaves too many people out in the cold culturally. So that would be my response to that comment. Intellectual disability is one of the communities that is hugely underserved by our present means of making work accessible.
Great, thank you, Abby. Does anyone else want to answer that question from the panelists? Okay, so I have one more question here at the moment. It's from Michelle Linder, and she asks, as a captioning advocate in the United States, how can I better advocate for captioning to be a pre-production focus on accessibility instead of a post-production afterthought? So I don't know if, Abby, you want to answer that as well.
So that is a big discussion. When it comes to changing how we approach accessibility, it really is going to have to be a ground shift in what we require of production companies, of movie studios, of book publishers. Right now, we don't require of them that they make works accessible. We ask them. And ultimately, that is part of the problem, because mostly corporations are interested in making money. And until we can prove to them that they can make money with accessible format works, which they absolutely can, because accessibility makes things better for everyone, not just the specific people who are targeted for that particular type of accessibility, it's going to be an afterthought for a lot of places. So I honestly believe that the best way that you can advocate for captioning to be a pre-production focus is to advocate that we put some kind of duty on the people who are making our cultural works, that they need to do this. If they're going to make these works available, offer them for sale, the work itself is the accessible space. So content is the space we all want to enter into, as opposed to, oh, well, we want to make sure we can be in the room, or we want to make sure that afterwards we can retrofit. It's always going to be an afterthought until we push past this idea that it's not necessary, that we're asking for it. Instead, it should be something that they are required to do, in my opinion.
Thanks, Abby. Do Nidhi or Sinead want to offer any other? Sinead, I think you would like to say something on that.
I don't have much to add. I think Abby was absolutely brilliant on that point. The only thing I would like to contribute is that in terms of being an advocate for these pieces, it is all of our responsibility to be asking that these requirements and these accessibility tools take place. So a very simple example is that I have an accessibility rider, kind of like the riders of the rock stars with gosh only knows what in their backstage dressing rooms. But my accessibility rider includes having a sign language interpreter or closed captioning, or preferably both, depending on the audience and depending on the availability of these requirements. And understanding that these accessibility needs are not just about what it is that I need as a participant or a speaker or the member of the audience, but actually who else are you providing for, whose disability may not be visible, or whose hearing could be, and whose engagement could be dramatically improved with the content based on those requirements. So by having a very simple email or document to say that these are the inclusive requirements that I have in order to participate, I think is something that we could all benefit from. Just a code of conduct.
That's a really good idea for any artist or performer or speaker to be able to adopt, even if it's not something they personally use, to be able to make it a condition of their participation that other people will be able to participate on an equal
And a
footing.
condition that institutions should hold themselves, that they will not participate with a production company, or they will not participate with an artist who refuses to caption their audiovisual content. That actually this inclusion rider is something we should all hold.
We now have another question coming in for you, Sinead. So the question says that Sinead spoke about the importance of allyship. Do the panelists have any examples of relationships they have developed that have been successful, and any strategies that they can share?
Yes, I think there was a brilliant point made earlier that in terms of inaccessibility and in terms of exclusion, what often bridges the gap is people. And I will often find that I physically cannot reach something or cannot do something because the world hasn't considered me, but it is the strangers of kindness, the kindness of strangers, that gives me agency and dignity and autonomy within certain spaces. I think the most success that I've had in encouraging either allyship in an individual or in an organization and a company that I might consult and work with is asking those difficult questions, allowing people to sit within their own discomfort and to learn from those experiences. To give you a trite but very personal quick example, I will often be in a supermarket or a grocery store and a child will see me. They will point me out and very loudly to the adult who is with them will say, "Look, there's a little woman." And the adult who is with them panics. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to do, and they feel a sense of guilt because they cannot believe that their child, who they raised with empathy, pointed me out so publicly. How did they do this? And the adult's solution is to remove that child from the space as quickly as possible. They race into the next aisle. And unintentionally, what they are telling that child is that I am not something to look at, nor am I someone that they should engage with. And that is due to our societal discomfort with disability and with different identities in general. But actually, what would have made that solution better for everybody was to sit in that discomfort and for the adult to say to that child, "Yes, that is a little woman. Why don't you say hello?" And the child would have instigated a hello. I would have said hello. The child would have realized that I am a very boring individual and would have moved on to whatever else interested them. And I parlay that story not to put the onus or the responsibility on disabled people to narrate their lives to strangers in order to facilitate education and advocacy. But there is so much that we don't know. And yet our reluctance to admit our lack of knowledge and awareness on these things is making us apathetic, is making us further isolate ourselves. So actually, in terms of that allyship, do the work, the reading, expose yourself to the things that you do not know, and use whatever power and position you occupy and whatever privileges you have to make those spaces more equal and more fair for those with disabilities.
Thanks, Sinead. I wonder, does Nidhi or Abby want to comment on that about experiences of allyship?
Can I go next?
Nidhi?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for so beautifully describing what allyship and onus could mean. I want to in some ways bring the idea of the previous accessibility question. I just wanted to bring some quick points there and link it to allyship, or take allyship into that domain. Really need to start looking at allyship from within us. I think in the movement, we keep saying the disability movement, and we know that people with disabilities are not a homogeneous group, and I think that's really, really important to come from. I think to offer allyship to others who seem to be in a more disempowered position, because we like it or not, there is sort of an unsaid hierarchy even within the disability movement, where people with severe and multiple disabilities, or those with deaf blindness, or sort of intellectual developmental disabilities on the spectrum, they're really not, I wouldn't say who's at the bottom, but there is some kind of hierarchy within the movement. So I think breaking our own discomfort and going over and becoming an ally is absolutely important to build empathy, or to even build an ally who would support us later. So being in the supportive role first, and then expecting and hoping support. I want to link it, the second piece of allyship, to the previous question of how could we get closed captioning as a pre-response and not a post, sort of a retrofitting thing, to really come together with what universal access would mean for everyone. I have colleagues who have attention deficit disorders. I have colleagues who have mental health issues. I have colleagues who are not familiar with accents. We're so global in our way of living, that if we had to bring closed captioning, we could. The problem is that right now we visualize the hard of hearing or the deaf community, and we say, okay, we are so many people, we are also consumers. Or if I had to bring an audio description, I would say, oh, we're blind users, we're so many people. But actually, we're not just so many people, we're many, many more. And sort of finding intentionally what that allyship would mean, and sort of bringing it as an opportunity to collaborate, could be another way of forging this kind of relationship. And I think sitting down and listening first, so that your allies know that you are intersectional, you have empathy, is extremely important for us to expect others to have empathy and support towards our sort of issues, our goals, and our intuitions.
Great, thank you. We just have one final comment here from a user who says that Dean in Claws, which is a crime comedy drama, is a nuanced autistic lead character whose story is also not centered around his autism. We've been talking about some examples of that. It also, the poster makes the point that in this hostile climate, it might be difficult for neurodivergent actors to come out as disabled, as it might hinder their opportunities, especially for disabled actors of colour. And I think that's a really important intersection of identity and discrimination point that we should keep in mind. So with that, I'm going to thank our panelists and start to bring this session towards a close. I want to encourage everyone who participated by following this online. If you heard things that interested you and made you curious for more, please do follow all of our excellent panelists' work, including on social media. We have been tagging them from the @NUIG CDLP account throughout the live tweeting of this webinar, so you can find their Twitter handles there. And also that if you want to learn even more about some of the subjects we've been talking about today, I would encourage you to keep in contact with us in Galway, and especially to consider our master's and PhD programs. Next year, we will, like many campuses around the world, be doing a blended learning option for our master's program. So that will make it more feasible than ever before for international students to take up this opportunity, no matter where they are in the world. And before I end, as well as thanking our excellent panelists, I also want to thank our sign language interpreters, Romy and Cormac, as well as our AV support, Cormac Staunton, my co-conspirator, Maria Ní Laharta, who came up with the idea for running this webinar, and the very impressive Centre for Disability Law and Policy backroom team, including everyone who's been manning our Twitter account and will continue to do so over the next few hours: Aoife, Keelan, Jenny, Anya, Emma, and Kleena, and of course Joanna Ford behind the scenes, who's been really helpful in putting all of this together. So I thank you all for your time and for participating, and I hope to continue working with you in the future, and wish you all